Hello, my name is Doug Chang. I'm the athletic trainer for Baylor School. I came from Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I went to school at Albion College, Michigan, and then went to the University of Florida for graduate school. And in graduate school, I also studied athletic training, but that was my concentration. My major at graduate school was applied physiology and kinesiology.
Why athletic training?
Well, athletic training, I actually found athletic training in undergraduate school at Albion College. It was one of the majors allowed for the college, and I actually took an intro class, and during the intro class, I really enjoyed the content. We were able to be very hands-on, where you automatically start taping and whatnot, and I really enjoyed all that hands-on activity. Why athletic training now? I think it has evolved over time, and I think now it's really having the opportunity to work with athletes. And now why I've chose athletic training, why I stick with it, is having the opportunity to be with athletes from, let's say, pre-injury, and when an injury occurs, throughout the rehabilitation process and all the way till they return to play. And I think that's so rewarding to have an athlete from the beginning of their injury process to the very, very end.
How did you decide the age group that you wanted to treat?
Well, first you need a job in terms of athletic training, so Baylor was looking to hire, so I was very fortunate and blessed to have the opportunity to come to Baylor. But really, when you're deciding what group you want to work with, there's a lot of different factors. With college students, they're considered all adults. With high school, you work a lot more with parents, and also, a lot can do with facilities, the type of athlete, the competitiveness level of their play. But in the end, now that I'm working in high school, I really enjoy that opportunity with young adults and really teenagers, and learn and see as they grow and develop. I really enjoy that, and that's the most rewarding part, is to be with them as I see them grow from as first year high school students all the way to seniors.
Who do you work with?
I work with a lot of people, specifically here at Baylor. As the assistant athletic trainer, I work directly with the head athletic trainer, but obviously I work, of course, with athletes. Another thing that people I work with is, of course, the athletic directors, coaches, assistant coaches, the entire staff, really, and we work as a team to provide the best care for our athletes. As athletic trainers, we're not physicians, so we work under physicians. So here we have a team physician at Baylor School, and we work with those people very closely as they help us diagnose and treat athletes here.
What are some common injuries that you see in high school students?
I think our most common injury that we see is ankle sprains. I think it's just a very high rate of injury. It's something that can occur to almost any sport, or even just walking around campus at Baylor. So we see a lot of ankle sprains. Some of your more common injuries, at this age group is, it changes, but definitely ankles is something we see a lot.
What are some ways for an athlete to decide if their pain is a direct result from an injury or muscle soreness that is less of a concern?
Well, what I would recommend for athletes to do is think about how their injury occurred, or what's bothering them. It's not so much soreness if you can remember an exact moment. For example, like if you're running on the field and you plant and twisted and you heard a pop, you felt a pop, you can think of an exact moment. That's a good example of where that might not be just soreness. That's an exact moment where there was a trauma that was caused. Now granted, that's an acute injury. There are injuries that you can't think of really what has happened or has developed over time. But when you put the whole thing together, and as athletic trainers, we have to decipher all these hints and these clues from a history, basically the athlete's history of their injury, then we can get a better idea if is it just muscle soreness, or is it actual, there's been trauma or even microtrauma for chronic injuries.
Will you please explain the RICE procedure and when you would prescribe it to an athlete?
Right, so rest, ice, compress, elevation. Really, that's your go-to with acute injuries. The reason for that is, of course, when you have an injury, you don't want to cause more trauma or make things worse. So resting the athlete is important. Um, there's different theories in terms of what does each letter really stand for, but the ones I've learned is rest, ice, compress, elevation. So ice, whenever you have an injury, there's going to be these physiological processes, and when you add ice to the mix, it changes, or not necessarily changes the um, different physiological processes, but it's can alter them and provide a better environment for healing. And compression, that's going to help as things swell and you apply compression. That's going to limit, not necessarily eradicate all swelling, but it's going to limit the amount of swelling. And then elevation also, whenever you get an injury, again, you don't want too much blood flow. The reason you don't want too much swelling to the area is because you'll cause secondary tissue death. So we elevate to, again, reduce and provide the best environment for healing.
For the sake of injury prevention, which do you suggest more to athletes, a dynamic or static stretch?
To help prevent injury, I would say a dynamic stretch before workout. They've already have research that has shown that you want to do a dynamic warm-up to really warm up before activity. Afterwards, I mean, static stretching is really good. I think both have a role in helping to prevent injury, but dynamic stretching for sure before you actually go out and play.
When observing a game as an athletic trainer, what do you look for the most? The mechanism and the movements of the athletes or their direct contact with one another?
A lot of times it depends, which body part is getting involved. So there's so many different types of injuries that are direct contact injuries, and there's so many different injuries that are non-contact injuries. For example, an ACL injury or knee injury can be completely non-contact, and just their positioning or the point of no return that they get into, you can see that mechanism and by just looking at how their leg is positioned and their knee is positioned. Whereas a direct contact injury, if you see an athlete hitting someone with their head down, that's something we also see. So really, we look for all things, but we're not going to catch every single thing on the field. But then if we're able to review it, through film or sometimes even watching professional games on TV, we'll see the mechanism, and that tells us a lot. Again, mechanism is key into learning what's going on with an athlete.
Would you ever consider leaving your job as a high school athletic trainer to become an athletic trainer for a big team like the Tennessee Vols? Would you ever consider leaving your job as a high school athletic trainer and becoming an athletic trainer for a big team like the Tennessee Vols?
I think that's definitely a possibility. I think with athletic training, there's, in any position, there's a progressive ladder. I don't think that the progressive ladder is directly, working middle school, then high school to college, and then to professional or semi-pro, and then to professional. I don't think that's the exact model for what is the next step. But I picture myself having gone to a big school like University of Florida. I can see myself working in that environment. I think the collegiate athletic setting is amazing, and you really do have some top-notch athletes, and I enjoy working with those types of people.
There are between 1.6 million and 3.8 million brain injuries occurring in sports each year, and 63,000 occur in high school sports alone, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. How do you, as an athletic trainer, work to prevent concussions within the athletes at Baylor?
I think preventing concussions is a very difficult thing to really actually do. I think if a concussion is going to happen, there are some things that may help reduce the number, but cannot completely prevent concussion. So what we do as an athletic trainers here at Baylor School is we help create a baseline testing to help understand and know our athletes to diagnose and help treat a concussion. In terms of baseline testing, we use Impact, which is an online computer neuro exam where they do different functions, and we can see when they don't have concussion where their baseline score is. And then after, or if we suspect a concussion, they can retake the exam and see where they're at. Prevention, again, wearing proper equipment, proper technique, I think, is the big thing to help prevent concussions, especially in your contact sports.
How would an athlete know if they're suffering from a brain injury like a concussion? What are some key symptoms that you see?
Some key symptoms that we see, there's a checklist that we go through here at Baylor School. A headache is a common one, dizziness, nausea, balance. I think for any athlete, there's a state of just not feeling right, which can be hard to decipher if you've never had a concussion before. But there's this sort of fog or window that you feel like you're looking through. These are key signs to look for. Some signs that we look for as an athletic trainer is we'll look at your balance, your ability to really concentrate and remember different things. And again, it's knowing how they got into the position that they're at, what caused them to feel as though they have a headache and whatnot.
If an athlete does have a concussion, what is your duty and role as an athletic trainer with their treatment and recovery?
So the goal for an athletic trainer is to cause no further harm. And with concussions now as such a hot topic, the reason that we have to act is there's secondary impact syndrome, is where an athlete can actually die from coming back to from a concussion too soon. So as an athletic trainer, our role is to first identify when an athlete has a concussion, remove them from play, allow them to rest properly, and then be seen by a physician. And then once the physician has seen them and they're symptom-free, then we can progressively return them back to play.
Moving on from concussions, what is sport-specific injury prevention?
Sport-specific injury prevention, I think that all depends on what injury we're talking about. For football, and even sometimes lacrosse, tackling techniques or hitting techniques is going to help prevent a lot of your head injuries for concussions. For volleyball or soccer, injuries that can occur, any sport like ankles or knees. Sport-specific soccer and volleyball, or jumping drills, or even basketball, really you can include, is working on your strength in terms of balance, your plyometrics, and strengthening the muscles around each area. Ankle balance techniques, there's plenty of drills where you can strengthen the structures around your knee and help your patella track. There's just so many different injury prevention steps. Again, injuries are going to occur just when you're in athletics and you're pushing your body to its limits in terms of performing very highly skilled movements. But we can't prevent every injury, but we can definitely reduce the rate.
What is a typical day as an athletic trainer at Baylor like?
Typical day as an athletic trainer at Baylor School includes, well, first, when I come in, we really prepare for the day. We'll get things ready, such as water or field setup. We'll set up the athletic training room to prepare for the students that come in. We'll get the cold whirlpool ready. We'll fill and stock our athletic training tables, our taping tables with tape and other different things, and really prepare for the athletes to come in. So after we really do set up, we have athletes come in, and after school they'll do rehabilitation before they head out to their practices, and the athletes that have not been in here before will come in for evaluation for injuries. A lot of times we know the athletes that are going to come in, they've come in before and they do their process in terms of rehabilitation. They know what exercises to do, and we help facilitate that. When a new injury comes in, or a new person that comes in, we'll help evaluate their athletic injury and also treat them. A lot of times you'll see us doing an evaluation, and then also at the same time doing the treatment, and then also monitoring rehabilitation. So it gets really busy. We run like almost like a clinic after school, and then we'll even tape athletes and get them ready. As practices go on, we then head out to the fields and we'll watch our more contact sports, and then such as football, and we'll be out there with the football team. If there's other athletic events going on in campus, like a game or competition, we'll go cover those games and competitions, and hopefully no injury occurs during those, but if something does, then we'll react and we'll head out onto the court or field or wherever that injury may have occurred. And then once all events, in terms of practices and games are over, if there's any additional injuries or treatments that we'll need to perform, we stay around and we'll break down, of course, field setup and of course the athletic training room. So that's more of a typical day of what I do as an athletic trainer.
What is the most intense injury that you've ever seen as an athletic trainer?
Most intense injury I've ever seen. Some of the most intense injuries I've seen, of course, your fractures are going to be some of your more gruesome injuries in terms of looks. Very intense injuries, of course, that I've seen are going to be your C-spine, where they injure their cervical spine. I've had to put someone on my spine board before, and that's a very intense moment where you definitely are focused and your adrenaline's pumping, and you want, of course, the athlete to do the best. I would say that's probably the most intense process that I've been a part of at this point.
What is one of your biggest pet peeves that occurs in the training room?
Pet peeve, I guess, in the athletic training room. Well, there's a lot of them. I think the biggest one is right now it's been no shoes on the table, but I think there's a lot of different ones. But definitely no shoes on our tables has been a big one for this year.
What piece of advice would you give a person interested in becoming an athletic trainer?
Find out if it's really what you want to do through spending as much time as you can in the athletic training room or shadowing an athletic trainer. It's one of those professions that you definitely don't do it for the hours and even sometimes the pay, but it's one of those professions that you love to do because of who you're working with. And if you don't love who you work with, it makes it very, very difficult. So if you don't love your athletes, you don't love the people that surround you and support you in terms of your profession, I would pick something that you do enjoy being around, because it's definitely a tough profession in terms of the demands that are placed upon you.
Okay, I'm just going to ask this question.